I will never forget that cruise. It started out as a normal vacation that was supposed to be a wonderful memory. My name was Jack. I decided to go on a cruise to get away from work for a while and enjoy life. The liner was huge, with lots of people on board, and it seemed like it was going to be one of the most relaxing cruises ever. The first few days were really beautiful. We enjoyed the sun, the ocean, and great dinners. Every evening was spent in the company of new acquaintances. The atmosphere on the ship was fun and carefree. One evening I met Michael and his wife Lisa. We became fast friends and spent a lot of time together. But things soon changed. One night while we were having dinner at a restaurant, a waiter came up to us with the news that one of the passengers had disappeared. That passenger turned out to be Tom, an elderly man who ate dinner at a neighboring table every night. At first we thought he had simply decided to stay in his cabin or was not feeling well. However, by the next day, everyone on board knew about his disappearance. The captain announced that they would investigate, but most of the passengers, including me, didn't pay much attention to it. A few days passed, and the liner continued on its course. However, the atmosphere on board began to change. Passengers became more wary, and many preferred to stay in their cabins. I, too, began to feel some inexplicable tension. It seemed that something invisible and ominous was in the air. One day I decided to take a walk on deck late at night. The night was quiet and starry, and I hoped the walk would help me relax. As I walked past one of the cabins, I heard strange noises. It sounded like someone was scrabbling from inside. I stopped and listened, but the sound stopped. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it. The next day, Michael told me that something strange had been going on in his cabin during the night. He said he heard footsteps outside the door, but when he opened it, no one was there. Lisa also noticed some shadows in the hallway. We began to suspect that something fishy was going on aboard. Then we learned that another passenger had disappeared, a young woman named Sarah. It came as a real shock. People started to panic, demanding explanations from the crew, but no one could give a definite answer. The captain claimed that a search was underway, but this did not reassure the passengers. On the contrary, the atmosphere became more and more tense and oppressive. The next day, I decided to investigate the ship more thoroughly. I wanted to understand what was going on this liner. I went around all the decks, looked in every corner, but found nothing unusual. However, a feeling of uneasiness did not leave me. It seemed to me that someone was following me, but whenever I turned around, there was no one. In the evening, I met up with Michael and Lisa again. They were scared and said they couldn't stay on this ship any longer. We decided to stick together and not be separated for a minute. That night, none of us slept. We sat in one of the cabins and waited for dawn. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of the waves and the creaking of the ship. The next day, we learned that another man had disappeared. It was John, the young guy we had seen at the party a couple days before. The situation was getting more and more dire. People were in a panic, and it seemed like no one knew what to do. I decided that I needed to find a way to contact the shore and report what was happening. But when I tried to use my cell phone, there was no connection. It seemed that the ship was cut off from the outside world. We tried to find a radio station, but all attempts were unsuccessful. That night, something terrible happened. We heard screams coming from the corridor. Running out of the cabin, we saw several people trying to get away from something. There was a body lying on the floor, and I realized it was John. His face was contorted with horror, and I couldn't understand what could have caused such a death. We hurried back to the cabin and barricaded ourselves there until morning. The next morning, we decided that we must look for other means of getting off the ship. We went around all the decks, looking for lifeboats, but they were all locked up. It seemed as if someone deliberately didn't want us to leave the liner. I began to suspect that someone from the crew was behind all the disappearances. Our hope of rescue was fading with every passing hour. We kept looking for a way out, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The passengers who remained on board were in a state of panic and fear. Some had already stopped believing in the possibility of rescue and just sat in their cabins, waiting for the end. One night I decided that it was necessary to unravel what exactly was happening on the ship. I gathered all my resolve and headed for the technical rooms to find something that could explain what was happening. I knew it was dangerous, but there was nothing left to do but act. I soon reached one of the technical bays, which was not easily accessible to normal passengers. Inside, there were a lot of wires and instruments. I came across a few non-functioning CCTV cameras and noticed that the wiring was damaged in some places. This struck me as odd. I continued exploring until I came across a strange, poorly lit corridor leading to the lower levels of the ship. Walking down this corridor, I found a door that was locked. I found a key in one of the drawers and opened it. Behind the door was a narrow tunnel that led further into the depths of the ship. I felt my heart beat faster. I knew it could be dangerous, but I had to find out what was going on. The tunnel led to a small room where one of the crew members I knew, Dan, was. He was dead. His face was covered in terror, and his body was lying in a strange pose. Around him, I noticed several notes and objects that seemed suspicious. I started looking through the notes, which mentioned some strange and disturbing things. They talked about a failed experiment that was being conducted on board. Then I noticed cameras on the surveillance wall connected to a network that had been interrupted. My thoughts froze as I realized that someone could have controlled what was happening on board through those cameras. It made sense, and it was ominous. I realized that someone may have been behind the disappearances and murders. When I returned to the surface, I saw that the atmosphere on the ship had become even more tense. The passengers began desperately searching for ways to escape. I tried to warn the others of what I had discovered, but many did not believe. Soon, more disappearances began. I saw people disappearing one by one, and panic gripped everyone. One night, Michael and I decided that we needed to join forces and find a way to solve the mystery. We went around every available space on the ship, trying to find some clues. We found several locked rooms that we couldn't open. We knew there could be important clues in there. After much searching, we found a way to open one of the locked doors, and inside we discovered a laboratory. The lab was full of medical supplies and equipment. Here we found documents that confirmed our worst fears. The documents contained information about the people who were being experimented on. These were not just laboratory studies, but experiments to alter people's mental state. The ship was being used as a closed laboratory, and it seems that the experiments did not go as planned. Our horrible suspicions were confirmed when we found a surveillance tape that captured the moments of the disappearances. The man who was responsible for the experiments clearly and explicitly revealed that he had used the cameras for surveillance and manipulation. It was all part of a plan to cause chaos and panic among the passengers. We realized that there was very little time left on board. We had to find a way to report this, but there was still no communication with the outside world. We had to do something to survive and stop these experiments. We began to plan how we could get to the captain's bridge, to take control of the ship and try to find help. But every step we took was full of danger. We had to hide and be careful not to get caught by whoever continued to manipulate the situation. We knew it was dangerous to stay on board, but we had no choice. We had to act decisively to stop this madness and try to escape before it was too late. We headed for the captain's bridge. The way was dangerous. The passengers who remained on board were becoming more and more desperate. We saw some of them start to panic and throw themselves at each other, looking for a way out. The situation was getting worse by the hour, and we knew that time was not on our side. As we approached the bridge, the doors appeared to be locked. I remembered that we had found keys in the lab that might fit. We used one of the keys to open the door and found ourselves inside. The bridge was empty and the control panels were a mess. The entire ship's control system was down. I turned on one of the monitoring screens that showed a general picture of the outside environment. As if in response to our efforts, the screen showed that the ship was near some abandoned island. I was stunned. If we did nothing to change course, disaster could await us. Michael and I began checking the control panels to see how we could regain control of the ship. I noticed that some wires had been cut and some instruments were clearly damaged. We worked relentlessly, trying to restore at least minimal functions to try to change the ship's course. We were fortunate to be able to regain partial control. I was able to restart the navigation system and adjust course to move away from the dangerous area where the ship had ended up. But this was only a temporary solution. We still didn't know how to get off the ship or how to deal with whoever was behind all the horrors. After we had set a safer course, we decided to return to the passengers. We had to warn them of what was happening and try to organize their evacuation. We made our way back down to the main decks, but our plan ran into new problems. As we approached the main saloon, we saw that the situation had worsened. The passengers had become even more restless and aggressive. Several people started to set up barricades, blocking the exits. Their fear and panic led to complete confusion. We tried to calm people down by explaining that we had found a way to control the ship, but our words were met with disbelief. The people didn't believe we could help them. Their fear of what might have happened on the ship overrode their ability to think straight. We continued to work on re-establishing communication with the outside world, hoping we could send an SOS signal or find a way to summon help. Our attempts were hampered by the fact that some of the communication systems on the ship were damaged or disabled. A few days later, when we were beginning to lose hope, we managed to pick up a weak radio signal. We sent a message describing the situation and asking for help. We didn't know if our signals would be received by the right services, but it was our only chance. While we waited for a response, we continued to monitor the situation on board. Problems continued to mount. Several people who had previously disappeared were found dead in various parts of the ship. Each new disappearance increased the atmosphere of fear and despair. Finally, after several long and agonizing days, we received an answer. Rescue ships were on their way. We had to meet them, but we still had to cope with those who remained on board and panicked. Michael and I tried to organize the passengers and help them focus on the impending rescue. The situation reached a peak as rescue boats approached the ship. We helped organize the evacuation and made sure that all passengers and remaining crew members were safely sent ashore. As the last people left the ship, we did our own due diligence to make sure everything was done correctly. After the ship was empty, the salvage vessels began to investigate it. We learned that all the horror we had endured was the result of the experiments being conducted on board. Many of those who disappeared were victims of improperly conducted experiments that eventually spiraled out of control. The captain and some of the crew were probably in cahoots with the organizers of the experiments, which explained their strange behavior. After we arrived ashore, we were given medical care and mental recovery assistance. We had been through a real nightmare, and it was hard to comprehend. However, we managed to survive and share our story to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Every time I look out at the ocean, I can't forget what happened on that cruise ship. It was a night full of horrors that left a mark on my life forever.